Hello everyone! So in the last episode we finished working on the player air movement, and this time we will polish it more by handling collisions in air. So the first thing we need to do is cancelling the momentum when we get blocked by a wall like this. So we can see that even though we are blocked, the player keeps moving, and we don't want that. So let's open our collision detection script, and at the top, let's add a serialized field, private transform, named FrontChecker, and a serialized field vector3 named FrontChecker size. Then we need a bool to tell us when there is something blocking the way. So public bool is front blocked. And lastly, for the block direction, let's have an int, and I'll call it block direction, or actually front block direction. Alright, and now in update, so we want to check if we're blocked only when the player is in air. So we check if the player is not grounded, and we will call the front check function, which we still don't have. So let's create it down here. Private void front check. And in here, let's use physics2d dot OverlapBox to check if a collider falls within a box area. So the center of the box is going to be our front checker dot position, and then the size is going to be the front checker size, then the angle of the box, and we don't want it to be rotated, so I'll give it a 0. And finally, we need to pass the layer mask of blocking objects. So let's go back to the top and create a serialized field, layer mask, and I'm gonna call it wall layers. And let's make the ground layers a serialized field as well. And then let's pass the wall layer mask in our function. So wall layers. All right. So this method returns a collider 2D. So let's create one. And I'll call it wall and set it equal to what this function returns. And after that, let's check if wall is not equal to null, meaning there's something blocking the way. So in this case, we will set is front blocked to true. And for the direction, let's check our last direction when we get blocked. So if player controller dot air movement dot moving right, we're gonna set the front block direction to 1. And if you are moving left when we get blocked, we want to set it to -1. All right, and we also want to cancel the momentum. So here, let's set moving right back to false. And here we want to set moving left back to false. All right, so else, when wall is equal to null, we set the front block direction to 0 and is front blocked to false. That's it. Let's now visualize our front checker. So down here inside on draw gizmos, let's draw another cube. So gizmos dot draw wire cube. So the center of the cube is the front checker dot position, and the size is going to be the front checker size. All right, and let's add a small failsafe. So before we draw the cube, we want to check if the front checker is not equal to null. And here also, let's add if the player controller is not equal to null. All right, we're all set now. So let's save and go back to Unity. And inside our player renderer, let's create an empty GameObject, which is going to be our front checker. So I'll name it FrontChecker. And then in our collision detection script, let's drag it into the FrontChecker. And for the size, let's try 0.3, 0.7, 0.3. And let's place it in front of the player. So maybe like this. All right, and we need the wall for testing. So let's create a new tile map. And we're gonna name this one wall. So let's add a tilemap collider. Tilemap collider 2D and a composite collider. Let's check use by composite and change the body type to static. And let's also create another tile map, which can be both walls and ground. So I'm gonna call it wall ground. Let's also add a collider, a composite collider, used by composite, and we change the type to static. Then let's go and add new layers. So I'll call the first one wall and the other one wall ground. So we click on the wall tile map. Let's change the layer to wall, the wall ground tile map, and let's change the layer to wall ground. Then we go to edit, project settings. So physics 2D, and we go down. And here we can see our new layers. So we want the player to interact with them. So let's make sure the intersection is checked and we uncheck everything else. And finally, in the collision detection script, let's select the wall and wall ground for the wall layers. And for the ground layers, let's add wall ground. Finally, let's remove these platforms and select the wall ground tile map. And let's place some tiles. That should do it. So let's hit play. So if we jump and move, we still have our air momentum. But when we hit the wall, we can see the momentum gets cancelled. Awesome. Now, one last thing we gotta do. So in the original game, when the player jumps and bumps his head on something, he bounces down immediately. So back in our collision detection script, we will need a top checker. So transform top checker, and also a top checker size, vector 3, top checker size, and also a boolean to tell us if we hit something. So public bool is top blocked. And finally a layer mask. So let's copy this one and I'll name this one ceiling layers. And then let's create a new function. So here, private void top check, and we're gonna use OverlapBox again. So physics 2D dot OverlapBox. So we have the top checker dot position for the center and top checker size 0 for the angle and ceiling layers for the layer mask. And we want to create a collider 2D. I'm gonna call it ceiling, and it's gonna be equal to whatever the function returns. And then we check if the ceiling is not null. We set is top block to true, and we want our player to stop jumping. So our rigid body velocity is gonna be equal to 0. So vector 2 dot 0. And we also want to set is jumping to false. So player controller dot air movement dot is jumping. But we can change it right now because it's private. So let's make it public. So where is it? This one is jumping, public. And here we can set it back to false. All right, now let's call this function in update. Here when we are not grounded, top check. And here when we touch the ground, so else, we want to set is front blocked back to false, and also is top blocked back to false. but we want to do that only if they are true. So if is front blocked, we set it back to false. And if top blocked, we set it back to false. So this way we won't be setting them multiple times. So now we know if we hit something from the top, the next step is to bounce back downward. So in fixed update, if is top blocked, we want to add force to our rigid body. So player controller.rb.add force. So the direction is going to be downward. So vector2.down, and we're going to multiply it by some force. So let's make a variable for that. So here we're going to have public float, and I'm going to call it bounce force. Let's give it a default value of 400 maybe, and then let's use it. So here we multiply it by the bounce force. So whenever we add forces continuously to our rigid body, we should always use fixed update. Okay, now after we add the force, let's set isTop blocked back to false to avoid adding forces multiple times. And let's also visualize this one. So we can just copy this line and change FrontChecker by TopChecker. TopChecker position, TopChecker size. All right, that's all. So let's save everything and switch back to Unity. Now inside the player renderer, let's create an empty GameObject for the TopChecker. And then let's drag it to the collision detection script. And for the size, let's try 0.7, 0.3, 0.3. Now we need to replace it. So let's drag it to the top, maybe like this. And finally, for the ceiling layers, let's select wall ground. So now we can hit play. So let's stand below the platform and try to jump. So you can see the player bounces down, and when we hit it from the side, the momentum is cancelled, and when falling off the platform, the falling functionality is working. Awesome! And with that, we're finally done with the player movement, and we can move on to the player attack next time. So as always, if you find this video useful, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the new episodes. Never forget to save your projects, and I'll see you next time.